Welcome to the Embryo Adoption Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Mellinger. On this show, we explore the possibilities embryo adoption offers to families often struggling with infertility, though not always. Through insightful interviews and moving stories, we uncover the blessings of this unique path to parenthood. This podcast is brought to you by the National Embryo Donation Center, giving hope to those longing to grow their families. Now, let's get started. So sometimes listening to the right podcast really can change your life. And I'm not talking about this podcast. That would be really self-serving. We're not doing that. Although, we do believe that that's true. But I want to introduce you now to Matt Banbury and Amber Sather. They are an NEDC family, and they've had a couple of kids through us, through embryo adoption. And it did happen through listening to a podcast. So we'll take a few steps back, guys, but let's just go ahead and start there. You really did find out about embryo adoption from a podcast. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I did. One of my favorite podcasts, I still listen to it, is called Matt and Dory's Excellent Adventure. And it's a couple who live in LA, and they talk about their journey going through IVF. And they started it, I think now their son is 4 years old, so they've maybe been doing it for 5 or 6 years. And the whole thing is talking about their experience, but also they get call-ins from, random people who are dealing with infertility and trying to start families and etc. And so I was listening to it one day, and I remember it was in the pandemic. I was out walking by myself, masked up, and I heard this woman talk about embryo adoption. I hadn't heard of that before. We'd been through many, many things like on our journey to try to become parents, and it really just caught my. Something about it. The main thing being that it meant you could carry the babies, as opposed to adoption, which is something we had also looked into. And so I was so curious. I went home literally that day and Googled it, and the NEDC is what came up. And I think I called you, Mark, like later that day. And I just to say, like, what are your main requirements here? Because it felt like something I was really curious about. And I fit those kind of basic requirements, and honestly, the rest is history. Like from there.
Yeah, I came home from
told
work.
You about it.
Yeah, and you asked if we're interested in this new thing that she had just found that same day, and then we were pretty quick to say, let's check it out. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and obviously we're so glad you did, and we'll get to the result here in the not too distant future on this podcast. But if anybody's interested, it's Matt and Dory's Excellent Adventure, EGG, and they've done a good job with it. They have hundreds of episodes, so that's, if you want to know how podcasting is done right, they do it right, and you, I'm sure, would be entertained listening to that. So take a step back then. Walk me briefly through your own infertility journey. You mentioned that it was a long road, and of course we have a heart for anybody who's been through that. What was the hardest thing about it?
Oh boy.
Yeah.
I think the wanting something so much. It was like Matt and I can't speak for you, but it's like, I think we had like such an adventurous and like amazing life together. And when we met, we were old. Like, I was 38 when we got married. So we knew that we wanted to have a family, and we felt like, okay, let's just get started down the road right away. And it was just like a lot of like to want something and then just be so disappointed, like kind of over and over again, when we knew that like we could have such a wonderful, beautiful family together.
Yeah, I think, we're both very, I don't want to say ambitious in like a negative light, but we both go after what we want in life. And we've been runners in the past, and Amber had her own business, and I feel like we were very in control of our lives then.
Yeah, right.
And
that kind of
I think after getting married and working to grow our family, there was a lack of control, but also maybe even more so for me, there was a lack of information. We
Mm-hmm.
kept going to doctors, and we saw several different doctors, and they'd say I was fine and healthy and just
Right.
keep trying, and they'd say the same thing to Amber, and that went on for years. And there's a sort of frustration that comes out of the healthcare system not being able to provide you, like, I would actually have preferred it if someone had said, you've got this issue or she has that issue, and we could have kind of processed emotionally. But it was a lot more challenging for us to have a lack of information, and so there was no follow-up. We couldn't take charge of the situation, and so for me, that was the most frustrating thing towards the beginning of that journey. And we did. I mean, we went through examinations, and then we had the IUI, right?
Yeah, we did a lot of rounds of IUI.
Yep.
We tried that a lot, and it was just like disappointing, exhausting.
Yep.
It was expensive. We were paying out of pocket. It was just
Yep.
like, and it was earlier in our marriage, so it was a struggle.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, and it just kept feeling like we weren't really supported in the process either. It was more like reproductive. We always felt like they were trying to kind of like sell us on something.
Yeah.
I don't know. It was just, it was hard. And then we decided to do private adoption.
Yeah. We went and we toured an adoption agency and got they were really good, actually. They gave us some excellent feedback, some hard numbers, and some realistic look at like what the journey to become parents looked like at that point. And it was quite long, and we were based in New York City. We weren't adopting internationally. We weren't adopting in an area where, to be honest, was particularly there isn't a long list of, or there aren't many children born without parents in New York. Most of them have family or extended family who take care of them if something doesn't work at home. And then we went through the private adoption route, and that road was interesting. I mean, I think that had we not found the NEDC, that's probably where we would have ended up growing our family from. But there were some pitfalls there and some really hard times.
Struggles.
And again, kind of through both of those, the IUI and the adoption, it's a sort of lonely pursuit, because this is something that people do not talk about. That's why things like Matt and Dory's Excellent Adventure, this podcast, honestly, just having open and honest conversations, if someone has fertility treatments, with your friends and family, and normalizing it is so critical, because a lot of your friends and family are hurting because they think it's something wrong with them. And if we're not talking about it, if we're not open about it, we're not actively causing them harm, but we are passively contributing to the challenges they're facing. Whereas I think that if we all talk about it a little bit more, it'd be easier. So we went through the certification to get adopted. We were posting ads. We had some responses that were, to be quite frank, like not honest, and not they were just challenging. And then that's when Amber found out about embryo adoption through the podcast, and we jumped on it. I mean, quickly, really quickly.
Well, and it was, and before we get to that turn or fully explore that turn, I hear what you're saying, because you guys had the dreaded unexplained infertility. And that, as you said, Matt, may be even harder, probably is even harder than learning, oh, something is wrong, quote unquote, with one half of the equation. Was not the case with you guys. Do you have any tips for somebody else who's just beginning to navigate specifically that unexplained infertility diagnosis, which can be so frustrating?
Yeah. I think what I would say is to be open to any different possibility that would end up providing a family for you. I think What did you have?
Well, yeah, I was going to say, I remember vividly a conversation we had in fertility clinic waiting room, and we were talking about IUI, and we were talking about IVF, and this was very early. This was actually maybe right at the start of our IUI journey, and we had this conversation about whether or not IVF was something we were going to consider, and we had sticker shock from the cost of that process, and we drew a line in the sand at that time. And this was
the beginning,
6 years before our boys were born, maybe more, like
Probably
6 or 7 years before our boys were born. And we said, no, we're not going to go the IVF route. And I do think actually one of the things I'm the most proud of in that process is how we made that statement. We made a decision for ourselves. It prompted a really good discussion. And then along that journey, when it was time to reconsider, we did so, and we supported one another. We heard one another, and we talked about our reasoning, and we talked about things. And we didn't even, there wasn't a conflict or anything. We both decided to essentially move the goalpost. We both said, look, we really want this thing. We didn't want to pursue this path previously, but let's circle back and let's kind of examine it and open our mind to it and turn it over a few times.
It actually improved your marriage, it sounds like, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we definitely went through a lot, going through this process together.
Mark, we can talk about all the ways that Amber has made me a better person, but it would be both a different podcast and a much longer one.
Oh man, I love it. You have got the husband thing down 110%, Matt. Way to go. Kudos to you.
Well trained. Yeah.
And I know it's true. So that's good as well. Well, so you start this new thing, embryo adoption. Like you said, you were open to it. Both of you said, okay, I think we can do this. Before we get to Willie and August, how was that process compared to how you thought it would be?
It was actually so laid out. It was so I feel like there was really, I'm a checklist person, I want to just see this list and I want to go check, check, check. And it was like that. It felt so, and I think because I don't know, the NEDC was both just told you kind of what we needed to do, but also just was supportive.
Totally.
Our go-to person was just we always had somebody we could communicate with, which was huge. And it just was we kind of knew what the steps were and we knew what we had to do and we just did those things.
Yeah, the first doctor we saw was from New York, and that made us feel even more at home. And he was a New Yorker. He communicated like a New Yorker. He's he talked to us. I remember the conversation. I think about it probably 4 or 5 times a day about multiple embryos, implanting multiple embryos, and he was like, "You better be sure." And I feel like he was looking directly at me when he said it. He was like, "Hey," and we'll talk about that, I'm sure. But yeah, you felt both like it was organized, well run, and that made you feel taken care of. But then also emotionally and compassionately, it was considered.
It didn't feel scary. Oh, what am I going to be going through physically? It felt like we just kind of knew what to expect. I think, and it was laid out for us. Yeah.
I would also say, kind of circling back to something that Amber said, it didn't feel like we were being sold something.
Right.
And I do think that a lot of that has to do with the mission-driven nature of embryo adoption. I think that because the reason that these organizations exist are not profit-driven, I think that it can be beneficial in that way.
Oh, it matters. Yeah, no, I can tell you that that certainly it does matter. As somebody who worked in the private sector for a long time and now has been here for close to a decade, and I don't make nearly as much as I did in the private sector, but it is because you care deeply about the work and the results. And it was so good for you guys to get to the finish line and get through that embryo transfer process. So take me to those moments when Willie and August, your boys, who are almost 3, were born. What do you recall most? What were you thinking at the time? This is long realized dream come true, right?
Well, I do have to mention that we did go through it twice.
Yes, that's right.
Right. So we did go through the process once and I didn't become pregnant. And so that was like a real turning point for us, because it was kind of like, okay, we've gone through this process, and it was almost like, in a way, sort of easier to just like, okay, we could just do it again. We've sort of like, we've done all the kind of legwork, right? And I remember we had to make a decision, like, because we were sort of at the end. We were like,
It was last call.
if this doesn't work, we're good. Our life, we're happy. We're going to move on.
Yeah.
We're going to, like, and then it worked. Thank goodness. But yeah, so it was, again, like, going through the second process was, again, still like super supportive. And like, when I was going to a clinic in New York to get all my checkups and everything. And I remember going there, and I did actually, the second time around, I took a pregnancy test first, because I wanted to know what they were going to say. And remember, I took the pregnancy test and I was like, like, oh my God. And I had a very high number, like, right away. And so to get that blood test and get the results, and just like, I remember when I called the NEDC to tell the nurse, and she was like, this is awesome. Like, the numbers are so high. It was in a good, like, we were on the way.
There were two of them.
There were two. And there were two. Like,
that is correct. That's the point of the story. When you get a number that high, real good chance it's multiple.
Right, it's two, exactly. Right. Yeah. And so, then I went back for the ultrasound that told me, like, it was actually two, and that was wild.
Yeah. Yeah, then it was shuffle around, change the doctors in New York, and get established.
But to go back to that moment, though, I don't think, like, we didn't talk a lot about, like, we just wanted to be pregnant. We didn't talk a lot before we knew it was twins about twins, even though we knew that was a possibility.
Right.
We were just still kind of like, but God, I hope I'm pregnant,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
So the fact that there were two, it was just like the most magic, like, incredible. It was crazy.
Yeah.
Like, I still, it was magic. It really was.
Because we did talk about, like, the decision to implant two embryos, and about how we felt like, one, those boys will always, they're also different. We should say they're different donor sets.
Yep.
And we
didn't know they were going to be boys.
We didn't know they were going to be boys. We did intentionally choose two different donor sets, and we wanted something something to bind them together. It's like, they're different. Their unique qualities are what will make them closer brothers. They're the only other person who knows what, like, even close, what it's like to be Willie is Gus.
Yeah.
And Gus Willie. And so that was part of our conversation. But yeah, I do think we could have started the twin research and community building.
Oh my gosh.
as soon as we implanted the two embryos, because, like, it is, I've never had singletons.
Yeah,
I'm just gonna say that it's not the same. Like,
we only know twins, so.
Yeah. And the challenge is unique, but the wins are unique, and the strategies are unique, and what you need and how you handle things are unique, and so that was cool. But yeah, you asked about
take me to the moment when it finally happened, if you can remember anything about. I mean, I know I can, and it's been 24 and 22 years ago since my kids were born.
You mean when I gave birth?
Yeah, when you gave birth.
Yeah. Well, so I actually had, aside from being sick a lot, I had a really healthy pregnancy. Until the end, I had a risk factor called Vasa previa, and I felt nothing. I felt great. I felt, but this was something that was detected quite early on. I think it was like 22 weeks or something like that. So we actually knew that the babies needed to come early. They wanted them to come out at 35 weeks because they didn't want me to actually go into labor. It could have caused harm to the boys. And so I checked into the hospital basically for bed rest about 10, 12 days before the scheduled C-section. So I was in there for, we joked that I was like, you know, paying rent for a month at NYU. But it was kind of an amazing experience because I was able to, like, before I got into that C-section room, I talked to every nurse. I knew all of the possible things that could happen. I was like so in tune with what was happening in my body, and just like the fact that I know that C-sections can be quite traumatic for a lot of people. And so the fact that it was scheduled, and like we kind of also got a lot of information about how the boys might be when they come out. You know, we're looking probably at the NICU. Just, it was nice to like have that kind of security going into it. And of course that the morning came, and of course in New York fashion, the time we were supposed to go in, it was delayed because there was an emergency, and we sat in the waiting room. We could hear all these things happening around us, you know, and finally we were able to go in, and it was, I mean, it was beautiful, crazy, painful, you know, emotional. Like, it was really cool. We got to hold both babies right after, and Matt was right there, and it was incredible.
It was cool.
Yeah, it was so amazing.
Yeah, they came out healthy, screaming straight to the NICU.
Yeah, they did go into the NICU. Willie was in for 12 days. Gus was in for 10 days.
Yeah.
So that was, of course, another challenge, but they were in really good shape. They were so tiny, but like, you just knew they were so strong. You know, like,
and the NICU took such good care of them.
Yeah.
And honestly, again, similar to like you going into the hospital early, we like learned all this stuff that I don't know
Matt
where you would learn
like
it.
Baby boot camp.
Yeah.
The NICU, because like you're just with all these nurses who are like, this is their job, you know, this is like, they take care of tiny, tiny babies. It's like, so it was tough, but like we felt like when we got home, we were ready to like start our lives.
Yeah, that's it. And that's a little bit of a delayed start, but it's usually that way when you have twins, you know, and it was good for you guys to know that and to be prepared. Well, tell me about Willie and Gus. You know, what are they like?
So they're 2.5. They turned 3 in September. They are rambunctious.
Yeah.
They're curious.
Yeah.
Very physical. They are, you describe their kind of vibe,
like,
because they're,
Willie is like, he's got a big, you know, mass of like a lion's mane of curly hair, and he's super smart, and he's always chatting and talking, even to himself, and he'll, you know, he's very independent, and he's physical, but he's in like a little bit more of like a, I don't know, like a gentler kind of way. Like he's like we call him a noodle.
He's our noodle. Yeah. He's like a little spaghetti noodle.
Yeah. And then Gus is, I mean, from day one, Gus has been like, I started calling him the fridge, and now I call him like Thor. He is like this.
He's kind of a beefcake.
I mean, he's got muscle definition. Like, he's like a 2-year-old who could really, you know, he can lift some heavy stuff and climb things. He's got a real intuitive sense of and physicality to where he'll figure things out and manipulate objects around him in a way that's really impressive. And he's just but inside he's the softest, sweetest. He's so
sweet, so
he talks to everyone out there. He walks up to anybody, and he wants to make sure that they see what he sees, whether it be a tractor or a snail or whatever.
Or he points us out. He'll say, you know, Mama, Papa.
Yeah, he's like introducing us to everyone. We just relocated. he's our ambassador.
Yeah.
He loves to give kisses and yeah.
So they're best friends. It's like when they're not together, they're asking about the other one.
Yeah.
But of course, when they're together, they're also just, I mean, the physical, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
They're mixing it up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's
I love it.
Yeah.
What a blessing. And now Willie's middle name is Knox. I have that in my notes. Is that correct? Is that for
Yeah.
Knoxville?
It
Yeah.
Did
is.
you just like the name?
We did like the name Knox. We kind of put it in different name scenarios, but we just always wanted some kind of tie to Knoxville because
in the process.
We just felt it felt so special going there. And even when Matt and I went, we did a lot of hiking in the mountains and we thought Tennessee was beautiful. And so, we wanted to,
There's some great coffee shops and stuff.
Yeah. We loved it. Yeah.
Those are a couple of the best things about the area are the coffee shops and being so close to the mountains. And I remember talking with you guys about that. Well, as we move toward wrapping it up, I always like to give our folks a chance at the end to offer any tips or advice to anybody who's thinking about going through the embryo adoption process. Is there anything like you wish you'd known at the beginning, that you didn't, or any other tips or advice that you'd have sort of a parting shot?
I think maybe this is where I would say I'd go back to my earlier when I would say just to be open to this like very special way of forming your family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'd say communication.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, talking. There are times when you're going through an IVF or an embryo adoption where, there are medications involved, and like you're administering, like you'd be in a fight, like a full on fight.
This is Dr. Matt because
you're going to be administering medication to your partner, and to me actually that was a really, I don't know. The end goal is amazing. Having kids has changed our lives for the better in so many different ways. But I will say, even going through the process of our struggle with fertility and growing our family brought us closer together. And I think kind of being open to that, to your point, and recognizing it and feeling gratitude for that. Sometimes in those dark moments when you're really struggling, to me was really helpful. I'm grateful for every bad day that we've ever had. And I think an embryo adoption wasn't always easy, but it was awesome.
It always felt
and it was
right.
the right thing.
It felt right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, we are so glad you guys came through. We love you. We love the result. And thank you for taking the time to share your story on the podcast.
We're happy to.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening to the Embryo Adoption Podcast. I hope you enjoyed learning more about this life-changing option for building a family. Hey, if you or someone you know could benefit from embryo adoption or donation, visit embryodonation.org to get started or just to find out more. Again, that's embryodonation.org. And don't forget to spread the word, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast app. Join me next time as we continue sharing inspirational stories of the embryo adoption journey. And until then, take care.